It was a chilly autumn evening in Heidelberg, a small city in southwestern Germany known for its picturesque landscapes and the ancient university that drew students from all over the world. The cobblestone streets were bathed in the soft glow of street lamps, casting long shadows that danced with the swaying trees. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of the Neckar River flowing steadily under the old bridge. Sophie B., a diligent medical student, was walking home after a long evening in the university library. Her backpack was heavy with textbooks and notes, and her mind was preoccupied with the upcoming exams. She glanced at her watch, almost midnight. The streets were quieter than usual, with most people already tucked away in their warm homes, the windows glowing softly like lanterns in the dark. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, the chill seeping through the fabric. As she turned onto a narrow alley that served as a shortcut to her apartment, she noticed something unsettling, a feeling of being watched. She quickened her pace, the sound of her boots tapping sharply against the cobblestones echoing through the alley. She told herself it was just her imagination, a byproduct of exhaustion and the eerie stillness of the night. But the feeling persisted. She glanced over her shoulder and saw nothing but shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she forced herself to take deep breaths, trying to calm the rising panic. As she exited the alley and stepped onto a broader street, she felt a presence again, this time more palpable, more menacing. He was there, cloaked in darkness, his eyes never leaving her. A tall figure, dressed in a long black coat, blending seamlessly with the night. He moved with an eerie silence, his steps perfectly synchronized with hers, maintaining a careful distance. He had been following her for weeks, always keeping to the shadows, always watching. His name was L.M., a man with a past as obscure as the night itself. He had arrived in Heidelberg under the guise of a tourist, but his real purpose was far more sinister. He had seen Sophie one day in the bustling market square, her laughter ringing like a melody amidst the chatter of vendors and shoppers. There was something about her, an aura of innocence and determination that captivated him. From that moment he was obsessed. He learned her routines, watched her from afar, memorized the routes she took, the places she frequented. He knew where she lived, who her friends were, and most importantly, when she was most vulnerable late at night, alone, walking home after a long day. Sophie's pace quickened further as she felt his presence draw closer. She turned into another alley, hoping to lose him in the labyrinthine streets of the old city. Her breaths came in short, sharp gasps, her anxiety mounting with each step. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the emergency number, but the screen slipped from her grasp and clattered to the ground. In her panic, she fumbled to pick it up, but it was too late. Lukas was upon her. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. His grip was strong, his breath hot against her ear. "Shh, don't scream," he whispered, his voice low and menacing. "I've been waiting for this moment, Sophie." Terror surged through her veins as she struggled against him, but his grip tightened. He dragged her deeper into the alley, away from prying eyes. The world around her seemed to blur, her senses overwhelmed by the sheer panic of the situation. Lukas was meticulous, his movements calculated. He had prepared for this night, planned every detail with precision. He knew the city well, knew where he could take her without being noticed. He had chosen this alley for its seclusion, its silence, its darkness. As he pulled her further into the shadows, a strange calm settled over Sophie. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to escape. She remembered the self-defense classes she had taken, the techniques she had learned. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and then, with all her strength, she elbowed him in the ribs. The sudden attack caught Lukas off guard, and his grip loosened just enough for her to break free. She ran, her legs propelled by sheer adrenaline, her mind focused on one thing: escape. She burst out of the alley and into the street, her cries for help echoing through the empty night. In the distance, she saw the headlights of a car approaching. She waved frantically, hoping the driver would see her, would stop. The car slowed, and she felt a glimmer of hope. But Lukas was relentless. He lunged after her, his hand reaching out to grab her once more. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, an older man with a concerned expression, jumped out. "Are you all right?" he shouted, rushing toward her. Sophie stumbled into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "He's after me. Please help." The man turned to face Lukas, who had stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing in anger. The confrontation was brief but intense, Lukas weighing his options, the old man ready to protect Sophie at any cost. Realizing he had lost the element of surprise, Lukas took a step back, melting into the shadows from which he had emerged. The driver quickly ushered Sophie into his car, locking the doors and speeding away. She looked back, her eyes scanning the dark streets for any sign of her pursuer. He was gone, but the fear lingered, a cold knot in her stomach. She knew this was not the end, that he would be back, and when he returned, she had to be ready. The car sped through the quiet streets, and the driver called the police, explaining the situation. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She was safe for now, but the memory of Lukas' cold eyes and his menacing whisper would haunt her. She had to find a way to stop him, to end this nightmare once and for all. As the car approached the police station, Sophie took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. She was not just a victim, she was a fighter, and she would not rest until Lukas was caught and brought to justice. The battle had just begun. Sophie sat in the sterile police station, her hands still shaking as she recounted the night's events to the officers. The room felt cold and impersonal, a stark contrast to the terror she had just experienced. Detective Eric Muller, a seasoned investigator with a stern demeanor, listened intently, his eyes narrowing as she described Lukas in detail. "We'll do everything we can to find him," Muller assured her, his voice calm and professional. But Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that Lukas was always one step ahead. So the next few days, Sophie tried to return to her normal routine, but the fear was constant. She installed new locks on her apartment door, avoided walking alone at night, and even started carrying pepper spray. Despite these precautions, the feeling of being watched never left her. One evening, while studying in her apartment, she heard a noise outside her window. Her heart raced as she approached cautiously, peering through the curtains. There, standing in the shadows, was Lukas, his eyes locked onto hers, a sinister smile spreading across his face before he vanished. Panicked, Sophie called the police again. But by the time they arrived, Lukas was long gone. Detective Muller increased patrols in her neighborhood and advised her to stay with friends, but Sophie felt nowhere was truly safe. Weeks passed with no sign of Lukas. Sophie tried to convince herself that he had moved on, that he had found another victim, but the gnawing fear persisted, disrupting her sleep and concentration. Her grades began to slip, and she found it increasingly difficult to focus on her studies. One rainy evening, as she walked home from the library with a friend, Emily, Sophie felt a familiar unease. She scanned the darkened streets but saw nothing. The two girls chatted nervously, their voices barely masking their anxiety. As they approached Sophie's apartment, a shadowy figure emerged from an alleyway. It was Lukas. His eyes glinted with malice as he stepped towards them. Sophie's breath caught in her throat, her body frozen in fear. Emily screamed, and they both ran, but Lukas was fast. He grabbed Sophie, his grip ironclad. Emily, in a desperate bid to help, swung her bag at him, but Lukas shoved her away effortlessly. Sophie struggled, her mind racing with terror. Suddenly, a blinding pain shot through her side as Lukas plunged a knife into her. She gasped, her vision blurring. Emily's screams seemed distant as she fell to the ground. Lukas disappeared into the night, leaving Sophie bleeding on the wet pavement. The police arrived moments later, summoned by Emily's frantic calls. An ambulance rushed Sophie to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. She survived the attack, but the physical and psychological scars were deep. Lukas was never caught. He vanished without a trace, leaving Sophie to live in constant fear. She moved to a different city, changed her name, and tried to rebuild her life. But the memory of Lukas' eyes, the feeling of his presence, haunted her. She knew he was out there somewhere, watching, waiting.